and welcome to another edition of Carolingia's Test Kitchen. I'm Zolani Faber, and today we'll be tackling a recipe for trout from my rather battered copy of Thomas Dawson's The Good Housewife's Jewel. Let's have a look. A trout baked or minced. Take a trout and seethe him, then take out all the bones. Then mince it very fine with 3 or 4 dates minced with it, seasoning it with ginger and cinnamon and a quantity of sugar and butter. Put all these together, working them fast. Then take your fine paste and cut it in 3 corner ways in a small bigness of 4 or 5 coffins in a dish. Then lay your stuff in them, close them, and so bake them. And in the serving of them, baste the covers with a little butter, and then cast a little blanch powder on them, and so serve it forth. Obviously, in Renaissance recipes, there can be a lot less detail than in a modern recipe, and in this particular case, there are some complexities in our interpretation, like what is a small bigness? We'll tackle them one at a time as we go. I happen to have had a frozen fillet of trout in my freezer, so I'll be working with that. And I think a lot of you already have some seethed, that is boiled and minced fish in your pantry, so we'll be trying one of these with a can of tuna fish and comparing them at the end. As always on Carolingia's Test Kitchen, we haven't tried this recipe before, so let's see what happens. Here we have our boiling water, and we're just going to slide this trout fillet in there, and we'll leave it in there for a couple of minutes until it turns a little bit white and becomes firm. Now we're going to make our fine paste. Dawson has a recipe for paste in The Good Housewife's Jewel, which I have not used before, so I'm taking a stab at these proportions. We'll be taking a 1.5 cups of flour. I'll just make a hole in the center of that. Put in 2 egg yolks and 2 tablespoons of melted butter. Now I'm going to work this in gradually, and I have here a quantity of beef stock that I can mix in as needed to make the paste more pliable. Dawson does have you make it only optionally with the inclusion of stock, but I think if you were going to make it without stock, you need a lot more eggs and butter, and we like it with a little stock in our house, so we'll be trying it this way. You can just work this with your hands. You could use a heavy spoon and a bowl or other implement, but I like to work with my hands. See, it's starting to come together. I'll probably add just a little bit more liquid as I work this. And you see it's really starting to come together into a proper dough. So once I get this together, our next step is going to be to roll it out. So Dawson is not super clear in how to do this, but when he tells us to cut the paste in 3 corner ways in a small bigness, there's some ambiguity there, of course. We are choosing to interpret that as cutting into triangles, which we can make coffins of a sort. Coffins are a medieval or Renaissance term for pie, but we can make ours essentially as turnovers. We're going to cut them into flat triangles, fill them, and fold over the corners to make a fairly modern turnover. Again, we don't know precisely how thin we are to roll this out, but I'm going to aim for maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, something relatively thin but still sturdy enough for us to fold some trout or tuna fish into it and bake. Alright, now I'm going to cut this out into rough triangles. You don't need to worry too much about getting them beautiful because they're going to be folded together anyway. Alright, and there we have it. Now that our trout has seethed and cooled a bit, we're just going to remove the skin and mince it up. So I'll just be taking a fork and using that to pry up the skin. Now that this is boiled, it's a lot easier to get this off. There we go. And we're just going to quickly mince this up, being on the lookout for any bones, as you always should do in a fish, even a nicely filleted fish like this. So we have our trout. Now we're going to mix our two fillings. So first we have our pound approximately of trout. We're going to mix into that 4 dates minced up. And then a tablespoon of butter, half a teaspoon of sugar and ginger, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and cinnamon. And Dawson tells us to work it fast, which we believe in this case to mean just to be well mixed. There we go for the trout. And for the tuna, we have a drained 5-ounce can of tuna. We'll be adding about 1 ounce of raisins, which again I've substituted as something very likely to be in your pantry. A teaspoon of butter, a pinch of sugar and ginger, and a half a pinch of salt and cinnamon. Now we're gonna fill our coffins. So we have here a 3-corner wise small bigness, and we'll just put a little bit of our trout mixture in the center here. It's very tempting to overfill these. I'm very prone to that, certainly, but there is definitely a possibility it won't close up nicely if you do that. So we'll see whether I manage to refrain enough this time. So I'm going to use a little more of this beef broth just to wet the edges of this so that we can close them up. And then I'm going to lift up the 3 corners and pinch along the seams to seal them. And you'll see it actually winds up looking a little bit like a samosa. Here we have our 5 coffins on a lightly oiled baking pan, and we're going to slide this into a 350-degree oven. We'll take a look at it after about 25 minutes. Alright, it's been 25 minutes. Let's have a look. These are browned a little bit, and I think they're well cooked, so we'll set them aside to cool. Alright, now that these have cooled for a minute, we've got our sample tuna coffin and our sample trout coffin. I'm going to cut these open and have a taste. And today in the kitchen we have a guest taster with us. This is Cassandra Iantide, Seneschal of Carolingia, and she'll be helping me judge how these came out. Still pretty steamy in there.
This is a 2-fork job.
Like a lot of medieval recipes, this mixes sweet and savory flavors in a way that we don't do very much modernly. There are some non-Western cuisines that do, but this is it's unusual, but I actually enjoy that.
I also tasted the filling before it was cooked, and the spices were much stronger, and I think they have mellowed.
Yeah, it is a little blender, so I guess the lesson there is you could go stronger on the spices. But let's, that was the tuna, let's cut open the trout and give that a try.
Trout is much fishier.
Mm-hmm.
I like the way the spice is mellowed in that though. I feel like the trout has a little more cinnamon taste.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that in both cases you could have a little bit more of the spice, but I agree that cinnamon and the trout work better together. Still, I'd say if you want to try this at home with what's in your pantry, the tuna fish and raisins actually still makes a pretty representative version of this dish. It's not exactly the same, but it has a lot of the same flavors going on, and I think that's a fun thing to try. So until next time, keep cooking.